Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3, lesson 3 of Koine Greek or Biblical Greek. If you have purchased a book, Machen's New Testament Greek for Beginners, then today will actually be lesson 4 in the book, but it's week 3. If you will remember, I informed you that the chapter on accents, which is chapter 2 in the text, we are skipping that over. There are just a very few places where the accents matter to interpretation. And that's the main goal here, is to be able to work in the Greek in interpretive ways. So we don't need to learn all of the rules of the accent. That's the way I was taught at seminary and graduate school. So that's the way that I bring things forward as well. So today is chapter 4, lesson 4. It's on the second declension in the order of words, and the movable nu is the title on it. We'll hit all of those. But before we get into that, we want to go back and we want to do a quick review of last week's or the previous lesson, lesson 2, which would have been on the present active indicative verb. So a couple of things just as a way of a reminder. A verb is something that indicates a state or an action. The tense indicates the aspect, voice indicates the whether the subject is doing the action or being acted upon, and mood indicates relation to reality. So last lesson, what we learned is the present active indicative. The present tense is in the present time. The active voice shows that the subject is doing the action. For example, blepo, I see. It's not that someone is looking upon, but rather you're actively seeing. Or gnosko, I know. So it's the subject is doing the action or the acting. And then the indicative mood makes an assertion as opposed to a wish or a command. And of course, each of these are formed by taking the stem of the verb. For example, last week or last lesson I used grapho, which is your gamma, your rho, your alpha, and your phi. That is the stem. You drop off that final omega because the lexical form is always the first person singular, the present active indicative, so it's always going to end in that omega. The omega ending would make it grapho, which means I write. Graphes would make it the present active indicative, second person singular. Graphes, you write, singular. Present active indicative, third person singular would be graph A, he, she, or it writes. Graph omen would be your first person plural. Present active indicative, first person plural of grapho, which would mean we write. Then you have graphete, which would be your present active indicative, second person plural of grapho, which means you plural write. Here in the South, we'd use good proper English and say y'all write. Graphusi, which would be your third person plural, present active indicative, third person plural of grapho, would be they write. You're talking about a group of people in the third person. And as you noticed, some of those parsed out, which is just to identify a particular verb according to its form, providing the tense, the voice, the mood, the person, and the number, and then always identifying it with the lexical form, which is that present active indicative, first person singular form of the word. So last week we ended with an exercise to do, which would simply be to translate and parse out the verbs that were at the end of the chapter. So number 1, give you the words of blepes, gnoskes, and lambanes. All of those are in the present active indicative, second person singular. So to correctly perform the exercise, number 1, blepes would be you see. It's the present active indicative, second person singular of blepo. Gnoskes is you know. It would be the present active indicative, second person singular of gnosko. And lambanes would be you take or you receive, and that would be the present active indicative, second person singular of lambano. Exercise 2, number 2, would be graph A, exa, and lege. Each of those, again, are the present active indicative, but this time third person singular of grapho, So it would be he or she or it writes. Graphe is present active indicative third person singular of grapho. Exe is he, she, or it has. It would be the present active indicative third person singular of echo. And lege would be he, she, or it says. And that would be your present active indicative third person singular of Lego. Number 3 is lue, didaske, and blepe. Again, these are the present active indicative third person singular of luo, didasko, and blepo. And they would be translated as he looses or he destroys, he teaches, or he sees. Number 4 is labonomen, ekomen, and gnoskomen. Each of those are in the present active indicative first person plural. So labonomen, for example, would be we take or we receive, present active indicative second person, present active indicative first person plural of lambano. Ekomen would be we have, which is your present active indicative first person plural of echo. And then gnoskomen is we know, and that's your present active indicative first person plural of gnosko. Number 5, blepete, legate, and graphete is the present active indicative second person plural, each of those. For you plural see, you plural say, you plural write. So each of those would be the present active indicative second person plural of blepo, lego, or grapho. Number 6, didaskusi, lambanusi, and luusi. Those are all present active indicative third person plural of teach, take, receive, or loose, destroy. So they teach, they take, or they receive, they loose, or they destroy. Present active indicative third person plural of didasko. Same for lambano and luo. So hopefully you're starting to see the pattern of how you form each of these words or each of these voices and moods and tenses with the person and the number to say the same thing for different groups of people or in different ways. Number 7 is a little bit different. So each one of these previous, every one of them were the same number and person. But in number 7, it's different. You have gnoskete, which is no, and you know by that epsilon, tau, epsilon ending that is going to be the second person plural. So that is the present active indicative second person plural of gnosko, you plural, no. You have gnoskes. Again, you're still talking about no, but you know by that epsilon, iota, sigma ending that you are in a second person singular. So it is you singular, no. And then the final one, gnoskomen, you know by that omicron mu, epsilon nu ending, omen ending, that it's we know. In other words, it's the present active indicative first person plural of gnosko. And that parsing, that repetitive way of talking the verbs out of what they are, is very vital, both in my eyes and in the eyes of Machen, which did the text, to help cement in your mind what it is you're seeing so that you can readily and mentally, immediately translate these when you run across them. And being able to identify person and number is important. Because as we move into nouns this week and in this week's lesson, you'll see that number and person has to agree, and it helps you to identify how to translate a sentence and what is referring to what. So we'll see some of that this week, but continue to do that as you parse. Let's take a look at these last two really quickly. Blepomen, number 8, blepomen, didaskusi, and lege. So blepomen is present active indicative first person plural of blepo, which means we see. Didaskusi is third person plural. So it's present active indicative third person plural of didasko, which is to teach. In other words, they teach. And then when we say lege, that's the third person singular because of that epsilon iota. So that's the present active indicative, third person singular of lego, he says. Number 9, you have ekes, blepusi, and labanomen. That is to say that you have, or they see, or we take, or we receive. Ekes is the present active indicative, second person singular of echo. Blepusi is the present active indicative, third person plural of blepo. And labanomen is the present active indicative, first person plural of lambano. And again, you can tell each of those by that ending attached to the stem. So this week we move on and we start learning some nouns. And what that means is you can start putting together some very basic and simple Greek sentences. You're going to learn rather quickly, though, that it is a bit different than English, and you really have to focus on some of your grammar. That's why last week I explained some of the terms, and again this week about the voice and the tense and the mood, and looking at the number and the person. That is all important. It's also important in nouns. But as a bridge between the two, we're going to go back before we move forward, and we're going to look at that third person plural present active indicative ending, usi. So if you'll go back to exercise 8, you'll see that the middle word in there is didaskusi, which is they teach. And you'll notice that the stem is that delta iota, delta alpha, sigma, and kappa. And then the ending for that is the omicron, upsilon, sigma, iota. Now that particular ending, only this ending, can have what in the Greek is called the movable nu. So in other words, that usi ending of the third person plural of the verb, a lot of times will have a nu attached to the end of it for an end sound. So in other words, it would be didaskusin. And in the Greek, they do that typically at the end of a sentence or where the following word begins with a vowel or the letter T. But it can occur anywhere, but it's most often there at the end of a sentence when the next word or somewhere where the following word begins with a vowel or a tau. And the reason for that, Greek really tries to, as a language over the years, they try to be very pleasing to the ears. So instead of having to have two vowel sounds back to back, they'll throw that movable nu in to try to soften or to make it flow a little bit better. So anytime you see that movable nu or the nu on the end of that third person plural for the present active indicative, it's just a way to make things sound better. And you will see it from time to time. And it's just something you really have to grow accustomed to seeing in the text. So last week, as we move on, last week was verbs. We've just done a quick review of that. This week, we're going to start on the nouns, learning the second declension nouns. And they do this because a good portion of the Greek words are of the second declension. And what you're going to see in these is that generally speaking, you're going to have masculine and neuter nouns in this second declension, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, let me make sure you understand what a noun is. I think most people would know, but just in case you don't, a noun is something that refers to a person, place, or thing, or idea. In English, we capitalize proper nouns, names of places, particular buildings or institutions or titles that are unique identifiers. And in Greek, we get the same thing. So although we just learned the minuscule and not the majuscule letters when we did the alphabet, it is good to keep those printed out. I did the handout where you can access on the Patreon. And then you can access them on the internet, but it's good to be able to identify the capital letters, not just the lowercase letters. But most of what you're going to see is going to be lowercase, and that's the primary thing to know. So I referenced gender, having masculine nouns, neuter nouns. In the Greek, there are 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. And grammatical gender is not the same thing as sex gender. Although most nouns that refer to females are going to be feminine, that'll be a declension we learn next week. And most of the nouns that refer to males are going to be masculine, and most that refer to things are going to be neuter. But at the end of the day, it is just grammar, and you will see some crossover between some of them, and some that just contradict that altogether. There are 2 numbers when we talk about nouns. So we've got the 3 genders, and then we've got 2 numbers, singular and plural. And verbs must agree with their subject and number. That's why I was telling you whether it's singular or plural is really important to understand from the verb, so you know where to match that in a sentence, so you can start identifying what noun that it goes with. You're also going to have 4 cases to a noun. You're going to have the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and the accusative. Your nominative is the case of the subject of the sentence. Your accusative is the case of the direct object. Your genitive is going to express varying relationships such as possession or source or separation. And your dative case also is going to express relationships, but those such as instrumentality, location, or reception. We'll go through some exercises here in a bit, but as a general rule, you can look at a nominative or accusative, and this is going to be for example, one of our words this week is logos, which is word. So when you see nominative or accusative, and we'll look at these endings, it's simply going to be a word. When you think of genitive, it's going to be of a word or of words. And when you look at dative, it's going to be to or for. So again, your genitive is expressing a relationship, more of a possession or a source or separation, and your dative is going to be more of an instrumentality or location or reception, like you give something to a person. So let me put some slides up here on the screen for you so you can follow along with what I'm talking about. Just as with your verb, you have a stem and an ending. You're going to have the same thing with your nouns. You're going to have a stem and you're going to have endings. But the noun is much less. So as you have a masculine noun, you're going to have 8 different ways, and that's it. When you have a neuter noun, you're going to have 8 different ways, and that's it. When you have a feminine noun, you're going to have 8 different ways, and that's going to be it. So your nouns are going to be much less involved, and your nouns are going to be called declensions, and you do not parse those. You parse out verbs, you conjugate verbs, but you decline nouns, just as a way of some of your grammar terminology. So looking here at masculine nouns, your nominative is always going to end in omicron sigma in the singular. In the genitive, it's always going to end in omicron upsilon in the genitive. In the dative, in singular. And pay close attention to this. I'm going to put up a large example of this here for you as well. You see the omega, but you notice the little mark underneath. So this is one of the diphthongs, if you followed along in the book, that you would have seen, where the iota at the end becomes a subscript under certain letters. That is the case in your dative. The dative singular is going to be an omega, and it's going to have that little iota subscript under it. So it's going to look almost just like a little accent or something underneath that particular declension, the dative singular of your masculine nouns. And actually you'll see the exact same in your neuter. But it's the omega with the iota subscript. Your accusative singular is going to be omicron nu. In your nominative plural, it's going to be omicron iota. Your genitive plural will be omega nu. Your dative plural will be omicron iota sigma. And your accusative plural will be omicron upsilon sigma. Now here are your neuter nouns. And you'll notice, if you'll look in your singular, there is only one difference. And if you look at the entirety of the chart, there's really only three differences on the entire chart. Your nominative singular is going to be different. It's an omicron nu. Your genitive, dative, accusative stays exactly the same as it does with the masculine. For your genitive, you've got your omicron upsilon. For dative, you've got your omega with the iota subscript. And for the accusative, you have omicron nu. Looking at the plural, you'll notice your nominative and your accusative are both just an alpha, while your genitive and dative remains the same. Your genitive plural is the omega nu, and your dative is omicron iota sigma. So those are your endings for your nouns, to be able to determine what case they're in, what number, and what to do with them in a sentence, basically. Let me put up for you an example here, just so you can see how this goes out. And I've did logos, which simply means word. We'll get to the vocabulary in a bit. Your nominative singular would be logos, which simply means a word. Genitive is logu, of a word. Logo is your dative singular, which would simply be to or for a word. Your accusative is logon, which is again simply a word. For your plural would be logoi, words, logon, of words, logois, to or for words, and logus, simply words. So as and we'll look at this, but I want to go ahead and give you this information now. In English, you can diagram a sentence based on the order of the words. Because of where the word falls, whether it's the object of the verb, whether it's the subject of the sentence, or whether it's placing some kind of instrumentality or relation, by the place in the sentence. In Greek, the word order is normally going to be the same: subject, verb, object. That's our normal order in English. But there is no particular way that it must be ordered. In other words, your endings determine how to translate it, not the order of the words. You see, in Latin, they've got a tendency to put the verb at the end. In English, we always follow that subject, verb, object. And Greek really can be most any way in the order of the sentence. And you really have to look at those endings of both your verb and your nouns to be able to piece together how they work. And we will look at an exercise example in just a moment. But let me go over your vocabulary with you for the week and explain a couple of things here. So as I put your vocabulary up, you'll notice that first word is adelphos. And after that, it has the omicron. And over the omicron, it has the rough breathing mark. So it would be ho. Each of these words that you encounter as a noun in a dictionary is going to be, as we go through this, identified by the article. In other words, ho would be an article. It means the. So literally what you're reading there is brother, comma, the. And we'll give special attention to this in a couple of chapters, but unless that article is explicitly with the noun that is written, it is simply a brother. That article is given here as a way to help you understand which declension it is, and also whether it is masculine or neuter in this particular exercise. So ho is a masculine noun. So for that, you're going to go to the masculine chart, and from that masculine chart, you're going to drop off. For example, if you wanted to say of a brother, then you would not have adelphos, but you would drop off that omicron sigma, and you would drop or add in the omicron upsilon, and you would have adelphu, and it would be of a brother. So adelphos, brother. Your second word is anthropos, man, person, human beings, if it's plural, or men or persons. There is a separate word for man, so really the sense of anthropos is where we get anthropology, and it's just the study of human beings or persons. Apostolos is apostle, doulos is slave or servant, doron is gift, and if you will look at doron, you will notice that the article that is placed with this is to. So to is an identifier that lets you know that that is a neuter noun. So if we take doron, that is going to be your lexical form. And we know that by looking there that that is gift. And we would simply translate it as gift. But if you wanted to say of a gift, you would drop off that omicron nu and you would add on the omicron upsilon instead. And what you would get would be doru, and it would be of a gift. Thanatos, death, that's masculine. Hieron. So this one, pay attention. If you'll look over top of that leading iota, you will notice that that has a rough breathing mark over it. So you have to have that huh at the beginning, hieron. And you'll notice by the tau omicron article there that this is a neuter noun as well. So you've got the two neuter nouns here, which is doron, gift, and hieron, which is temple. You also have a conjunction here, kai, which literally means and, logos, which is word, namos, which is law, oikos, which is house. And if you'll notice over oikos, it does have the smooth breathing mark, so it is just oikos. There's no H sound because of the smooth breathing mark. And these are things, the more that you read and the more that you study, the more that it will become second nature, and you really don't think about it. But for now, you really need to pay attention. You need to commit to memory these endings, your vocabulary, and then you also need to learn to pay attention when your leading letter in a word is a vowel or a diphthong or an R. You're always going to have a breathing mark over it, and you need to look to see whether you need to pronounce that with an H at the beginning or not. So oikos is a smooth breathing mark, no H sound, and it means house. But by contrast, your final word for the week, your final vocabulary word is fuios. It's not we, it's fuios, which literally means son. But you'll notice with this diphthong, this particular one, and oikos is the same way, it's on the second vowel of the diphthong. So you have to look to see how you're going to pronounce that. Let me put an exercise up for you. We'll take a look at a sentence and help you understand how to begin translating Greek. This will be your first real exercise in actually doing translation work from Greek back into English. So if we look at number 18 in your exercises for the week, what you're going to find is this sentence. Adelphoi kai douloi, gnoskousin, kai blepusin, hiera kai dora. Let's read that again and pay attention. I'm going to break down a couple of things for you as I read it. Adelphoi, the smooth breathing mark. Kai douloi, gnoskousin. So gnoskousin, you'll notice that movable nu that we talked about. And it doesn't really follow here what we talked about. But if you remember, I told you that it can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be at the end. It doesn't have to be when the next word begins with a tau or a vowel, although that is most often where you'll find it. Here, just has the nu stuck at the end of it. So, gnoskousin, kai blepusin, which is also a movable nu, but that next word begins with a vowel. Hiera, kai dora. Adelphoi, kai douloi, gnoskousin, kai blepusin, hiera, kai dora. Now, Here's how we're going to break this sentence down. You need to start looking at the words and understanding what they are. And for your first exercise, it's going to take you a while, and you really probably need to write each one down and write out what it is. You need to write the case, you need to identify the number, and also what place that is. So if you have a Adelphoi, you'll see that that's a nominative plural. So that makes it the subject. And the translation of that is brothers. Kai is just a conjunction. It means and. So we've got brothers and. We look at douloi. We'll notice that that is also a nominative plural, which makes it also a subject, and it is translated as servants. So Adelphoi kai douloi, brothers and servants. Then you move to gnoskousin. Gnoskousin is the present active indicative, third person plural of gnosko, which is know. And in this case, since it's the third person plural, it's they know. Blepousin is the present active indicative, third person plural of blepo, which is see. You will understand that by the ending of the word, that omicron, upsilon, sigma, iota, and both of these have the movable nu. So you have Adelphoi, kai douloi, gnoskousin, kai blepousin. Brothers and servants know and see. You don't have to say they know because it agrees in number with the subject. You know that the verb goes with that Adelphoi and douloi, and you know that they is talking about brothers and servants. So you don't have to add the they into the translation. It is simply brothers and servants know and see. Hierai ko kai dora. Hiera kai dora. Both of these words are accusative plural. Now, I picked this one out to do the example because in the neuter, your nominative and accusative plural both end with that alpha. But we already know that we have the subject picked out because the first two words, brothers and servants, or Adelphoi and douloi, can only be nominative plural, so that is the subject. So we have hiera and dora are both going to be neuter accusative plural of these. Since the subject is already established, he's become the direct object of the verb, and it is temples and gifts. So brothers and servants, the subject, know and see, the verb, temples and gifts, the direct objects of the verbs. Brothers and servants know and see temples and gifts. There is your example for the week. You have, I believe it is 20 exercises that you can go through this week, and that can take a little bit of time, but it will establish what you are doing in these first three lessons of learning the alphabet, learning the present active indicative verb, and starting to learn the declensions of the nouns will allow you to form simple present time sentences in Greek. And as you're learning the vocabulary, some of the words that we are beginning to see throughout the vocabulary here are really key throughout the entirety of the Bible. Sight plays a key role in the New Testament of blepo. Gnosko, having knowledge or knowing something, plays a big role. Grapho, writing. Didasko, teaching. Echo, possessing something or having something. Labano, taking or receiving. Lego, saying. Jesus many times says, and I say or I tell you. Luo, loosing and destroying. My goodness, that's such a powerful part of the New Testament, that we can loose on earth and it'll be loosed in heaven, and that we can destroy things through the authority given us by Jesus Christ. So you're seeing important words: adelphos, brother; anthropos, talking about mankind; apostolos, talking about your apostles; and doulos, being a slave or a servant. And we have to become a servant. Jesus became a servant even though he was master. He became a servant in John chapter 13 as he washed feet. Doron, talking about a gift. There is no greater gift than the salvation of Jesus Christ, that he give through his thanatos, which is your death, that he give through thanatos, death on the cross. Hieron, the temple. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Ghost. Kai, that conjunction, you have to know how to use proper terminology and put together good sentences, so that's important too. But you'll be surprised to see how many times that plays out in Mark, where Mark says kai euthos, which is literally and immediately. Mark moves at a rapid pace, and that word plays an important part in moving you from scene to scene in the Gospel of Mark, kai euthos, and immediately. Logos. In the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was the Word. It's one of the most important words in the New Testament. Nomos is law. Jesus didn't come to break the law, but rather to fulfill it. Oikos, which is house. I actually just preached about that at my local church of how we have to get to the house of God, and that's referenced often enough. And then we also have weos. Do you not know that we are heirs and joint heirs with Jesus Christ? So not only is he the Son of the living God, we are also adopted sons of God. We are brothers with Jesus Christ. We are heirs and joint heirs with him. So there is your exercise, your lesson for the week on your first or your second declension, masculine and neuter nouns. And I pray that you stick with what we're doing. It will pay off at the end, but it is a slow and tedious process, and it will become even more difficult if you don't build a firm foundation now. This foundation of these first three lessons are a necessity to everything that we are going to do over the next 25 to 28 lessons or so as we go through the entirety of the textbook. I pray everyone has a blessed time in the Lord, a blessed time learning something new and engaging in the Word in a different way. Thank you all so much. Looking forward to you joining us again on the next lesson.